Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So, indeed, China and India, the relations between China and India is very important for our region as well. So, we know China is our neighbor. India call Central Asia as an extended neighborhood. So, it's in the policy of India, Central Asia is included as an extended neighborhood. So, it's very important for us to know relations between these two countries. The first issue is why Chindia is impossible. So what is the Chindia? The term Chindia was coined in 2005 by the member of the Indian Parliament, Jairam Ramesh, and the core of his idea was the environmental issues. Besides their economic cooperations, besides their cultural links, besides their historical links and other very important relations between those two countries, they have issues based on the environmental issues, including the climate change and other issues. So the idea which was proposed by Jairam Ramesh was, first of all, to collaborate based on their environmental issues, and then go to the other sectors, including then go to economic sector. But the idea was not welcomed among the society, especially in China, because of several factors. So first of all, I would like to mention that in relation about the attitudes towards India in China. So when I was doing the field works, I was mentioning that China is only thinking about the competition with the US. So for Chinese, the India is far behind them. So they are not seeing Indians as their rivals. They are thinking only about the US cooperation. So they are not involving any rivalry or competition with Indians as Chinese think. But on the Indian side, it's a different situation. All the competitions is with China. So they want to be as good as China, and they want to be compared with China. That's why in China it is not the term Chindia among the Chinese society is not appreciated. In India, it was very much welcomed. But the idea was just only in his words, and later he published this book. And here he argues why he coined this term Chindia, and why China and India should cooperate with each other. And nowadays, as you told, China and India are among the largest countries in the world, not in terms of only population, but also economically, in terms of GDP PPT. China is the second largest economy in the world, and India is the fifth largest. And in these coming years, this or next year, it is expected that India will be the fourth largest economy in the world in terms of PPT.
PPP. Passing which country?
I don't know which country to pass, but in terms of their economic development. So in this 2001, according to this, the forecasts, development of China will be at the same level, while India will continue to grow.
Yeah.
So that's why it is expected that India could overpass its development. Mm-hmm. So. But in terms of per capita, of course, it is different, because we can't compare Chinese per capita with Indians, because there are huge lag between the Indian society, between the Islam and the middle income class. So it could be it could be wrong to compare in terms of per capita, because if in China it's communism and everything is spread between the population, in India the situation is quite different. So the institutional framework of China-India cooperation at the present time. So they have in 2003 Declaration on Principles for Relations, the first comprehensive dialogue mechanism. Then in 2005 they have concluded the Strategic Partnership Agreement, and in 2008 they have also agreed on the mutual shared visions for the 21st century. So it says about their future, their common vision for the next century. So it means they are continuing of their cooperation. Economic cooperation, they have an agreement from 1994, 2005 and 2006, and they are working based on these agreements. In terms of economic relations, they have, this is the dynamics of their economic cooperation. At present, the total trade between China and India is around $85 billion, out of which 51 for the Indian trade imbalance for India is $51 billion. So it's a huge difference between the India's trade and Chinese trade. So this is the good side of the story. So this is how they are developing nowadays. But before this, before the 2000s, they have a very difficult relations and complex challenges which are formulated their relations nowadays and still influencing, directly influencing their relations nowadays. So one of the issues which are very important for the China-India dialogue is the Tibet issue. You can see on the map it's the Tibet Plateau's place. It brings water to 11 countries, to whole South Asia. It also produces 40% of Chinese mineral resources. It has the major rivers in Asia. However, this is the geographical importance of Tibet, but there is also the geopolitical importance, and also nowadays it is very important issue for China, which includes India, because in 1959 120,000 Dalai Lama and his 100,000 followers were migrated in India, and now until nowadays living in India. And nowadays it has been, so the refugees living in Tibet construct they have their own central Tibetan administration, and they have operating their political activities for the independence of Tibet, nowadays for the more wide autonomy of the Tibet region. So that's why when we are speaking about China-India relations, it is very important to include Tibet issue, because triggering point in exaggerating relations between China and India was the issue with Dalai Lama, when Dalai Lama moved to India, and nowadays Dalai Lama living in Dharamsala, it is very close to the borders, to the Tibetan borders, so it is very easy for him to have contacts with the other side of the Tibetan population. So it's a very important issue for India. Another issue which is still unresolved nowadays is the border issue. So China and India has three sectors, three border sectors between each other: the eastern sector, western sector, central sector, and eastern sector. Central sector was resolved in 2000, while western and eastern sector are still undefined sectors, and they still cause issues between these two states. So why these two sectors are not resolved, and what's the problem with these sectors? The Aksai Chin, the territory of the western sector, so this part, the Aksai Chin is in, actually it is in glaciers, and it's an uninhabited land, so it calls no man's land. So nobody could live there unless the wild animals. But the problem was that the another sector, which is nowadays Arunachal Pradesh, it is part of the Indian, it's situated in the northeast India and part of the Seven Sisters. It was claimed by the Chinese side based on the agreement. So the problem with this situation is that before, in the beginning of the 19th century, there was a competition between British India and the Chinese, and the idea was, after dividing the Mongolia to the outer Mongolia and the inner Mongolia between Russia and China, the same idea was in the minds of the British officers. So they wanted to divide Tibet to the outer Tibet and inner Tibet. So the inner Tibet should be part of the Indian territory, and the outer should be the independent state for the British officers. So the design was this, and based on this idea, in 1914 they have initiated the Simla Conference, which was presented by the Chinese side, by the British side, and by the Tibetan officers. So they have, during the Simla Conference in 1914, they had three different maps, two different types of conversations. So they have an open conference and a closed conversation. So the idea was that to present the one map for the Chinese side, but to sign another map, which was not with a smaller scale. So not to show that this McMahon line was a part of the Indian side. But then at the end, Chinese filled some unclearances, and the Chinese government said that they will not sign any documents of the Simla conference. And at the end, the conference ended with signing the agreements between India and Tibet without Chinese participation. But after this, in 1914, after the end of the Simla conference, it was everywhere stated that the Simla conference had not any results, and everybody forgot about this conference. But in 1934, the British officer Olaf Caro, he discovered these secret documents of the Simla conference, and he proposed to the British government to change the results of the Simla conference as it was signed. So British government agreed with that, and then all the documents related to the Simla conference was reprinted and rewritten as like the McMahon Line was signed. And the only 3 copies are left in the Beijing Library, in London, and at Harvard University. So, but these documents were sealed for with the 50 years of secrecy, and it was opened only in the 1990s. Before that, it was all of them were closed. So this was the problem between basic problem between two sides, and as a result, after the independence, Indian side said that the territory of Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin is a part of the Indian side, but Chinese claimed that it was part of the Chinese side. So that's how the problem started after the independence. The thing was, the triggering point was again after the Asylum of 1959, when the Dalai Lama moved to the territory of India, the situation exacerbated, and both sides started to claim about these both territories. And at the end, in 1964, there was a 1 month war between China and India, which still until nowadays affected bilateral relations. So this is the main issue with the problem, and another problem in this regard to the border issue is the Pakistan factor. Pakistan factor was, so Chinese idea was to use this proverb, the foe of my foe is my friend, and based on this, China started to have good relations with the Pakistani side, but the important issue between China and Pakistan in this, regarding the border issue was that in 1963, Pakistan gifted part of the Indian claimed Kashmir territory to to China. So this part of China was presented by Pakistan. So this part is the Kashmir's Pakistan is part of Kashmir, and this is the Indian part of Kashmir. But from its own part, Pakistan ceded this territory and gifted to China in 1963. In
return of anything, or?
No, not returning anything. So yeah, wow. Because of the claims of Chinese, they just gifted this territory. So this situation more exaggerated the border problems between the countries. Because this part is claimed, this is the Chinese territory, but claimed by the Indian side. And in addition, in 1963, this territory is also added. So nowadays, why the problem with the why India is not included in Belt and Road Initiative is because of this, because it goes through this territory. So India saying that it is the question of sovereignty, because India is claiming this as a part of its own territory. So that's the difficulties in this situation. Apart from this, the diplomatic relations, military issues, the support of Chinese government, and all these actions, this was the initial problem between this in the triangle of China, India, and Pakistan.
So the area is mainly mountainous region, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So what is the strategic importance of this? Is it, as I know that there are some rivers, there are some headwaters there, but apart from water, is there any other strategic?
Here is the Siliguri glaciers, so it is important for waters. But also the Aksai Chin. Actually, one more interesting thing is that Aksai Chin is in part of the Chinese territory, but it is reachable only from the Chinese side. So even though Indians are claiming that this is its own territory, they cannot reach it from the Indian side
because of the
mountains.
Topography. Okay.
Yeah. The same with the Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh is in tropical area. It's jungles there. So it is reachable. It is part of the India's territory, but it could not be reached from the Indian side because of from the Chinese side, yeah, because of the mountains.
From the Chinese side.
From the Chinese side.
It is inaccessible from the Chinese side.
Yes, it is only accessible from the Indian side.
Indian side, but this is effectively under control of China.
No, it's Indian.
Oh, it's Indian.
Yeah,
Oh.
it is one of the states, in the north part of India there are 7 states which is called Seven Sisters. So it is one of the 7 sisters. But it's claimed by the Chinese. So all this, here is the Assam, so it's all the jungle territories, and this part of Assam was, during the British time, was under the inner permit. There was an inner permit from 1873. So in order to travel to this area during the British time, you need a permit, special permit to enter this territory. So that's why the flora and fauna of this place is untouchable, and until nowadays there are lots of a huge amount of national parks, wild parks,
well preserved.
Yeah, well
and it's
preserved.
also maybe significant for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, but it's mostly untouchable, untouched. So it's like
This
the
time.
population. It's until nowadays it is under developed regions,
Okay.
and it's among the poorest regions in India. So the importance of Aksai was that in 1954 Chinese built a road which connect Tibet with Xinjiang, Kashgaria with Lhasa. So it goes through the Aksai territory. It is the mountainous road. It is very dangerous. It goes G219, and it's very dangerous road. But it still connects Tibet with Kashgar. So if the other roads which connect, usually the connection with Tibet goes through Lhasa to Qinghai. Qinghai is this part. So this part is the mountainous area and very difficult to reach, and that's why Tibet's connection with other part of China goes through Qinghai. Qinghai is somewhere here, so from like making a circle. So that's why this side was the road was very important for the Chinese side. But Indians, they haven't got any strategic importance in this sector. Here I put that the Indian historians said that the Indian claim to Aksai Chin has no basis in treaty, usage, or geography, and Joe also stated that there is no importance in our Arunachal Pradesh actually. But it's the question. Here is the Joe Inval's words. Yeah, but this is all about product of. It is against this the McMahon line. But actually, historically, it was part of Indian territory. So all these issues complicated during the 1962 war, which was only 1 month, but it was a kind of humiliation of Indians, because it was Chinese wanted just to teach Indians because initially Zhou Enlai proposed to Jawaharlal Nehru to have negotiations and to decide the borders between them. But Nehru stated that there is no border issues with China, and all these territories are ours. It is based on the history, based on the geography, and based on the records, which is one of them is McMahon line. So Zhou Enlai, the Chinese side decided to teach Indians and started the war in 1962 war, and the result was that from Chinese side it was 5 divisions, from the Indian side there was only 1 division as a response. So they just clashed everything. But the Chinese returned all the territories that they invaded after 1 month. So this is how the situation evolved, and after that they had stopped all the diplomatic relation between those 2 countries, and they resumed only in 1976. They again reopened the diplomatic missions between the countries, and the border issue started to negotiate starting from 1980s. Until 88 there was 8 rounds of meetings without any results. In 90s it was the joint working groups. It has 15 meetings. During this they had 5 agreements which are still working nowadays, and the main achievements was that they have developed the confidence building measures at the borderlands. So starting from the 1903, 1906 was the major agreements between these 2 sides, and from 96 they have the first military negotiations on the borders. So they have informing other side. And the third step was in special representative meetings starting from 2003. And at the meeting in 2003, when the Prime Minister of India, Vajpayee, came to China, they have agreed that before they had the meetings was in lower, not the lower official levels. So they decided to raise this level and at the level of the deputy prime ministers. So special representative meetings from 2003. The main aim of the special representative meetings is to resolve the issue. And according to the experts, they have reached the second stage, which is about. So first, they have to develop the mechanisms of negotiations. So they have reached this level, and now they are on the way of delimiting and demarcating the territory between the lands. But there is no hopes that it will be resolved in a present future. Because in order to resolve the issue between the border issue, there should be some political motive rather than the technical. Because all the technical actions have already done, and the technical sides are ready to settle the borders. Because it is already clear that Aksai Chin is part of China and the Arunachal Pradesh is part of India, and there is no differences with that. But the approaches of both sides. So China 3 times proposed for India to exchange the territory of Aksai Chin with Arunachal Pradesh, and then the question would be just resolved. They have proposed 3 times, but 3 times India side rejected this proposal. But now India wants to agree, but China is not proposing again. But Indians' approach was that each sector should be investigated separately, based on the maps, on the historical evidence, etc. So nowadays, Indians are waiting when China will propose, but China decided only when time comes, then they will propose this again.
So there is no significant population in both countries, in both regions. No?
In Aksai Chin, there is no any population. In Arunachal Pradesh, there is a population, but for income, it is around more than 1 billion. So 1 million. 1 million. So
mostly Indians.
In the northeastern part of India, there is no Indians are living there. This part of it's the tribal area, so the tribal groups are living there. So it is more close to the Tibetans rather than to the Indians. So they are looking like Tibetans, and their religion is shamanism, Tibetan Buddhism, different types of kind of shamanism, but not the Indian Buddhism.
So far, they did not convey the issue to the any court of arbitration or international court of justice, right?
No, they haven't.
Yeah.
It is the bilateral issue between those two countries, and it's the bilateral issue, and
there is no any issue linkages, right? Like, for example, in return for increasing the size of trade between the two, then India can give concessions or vice versa. No, any trade related issue linkages or side payments, other things, I don't know.
No, they haven't. The commercial relations started real commercial relations started only in 1990s. Before it was like just in the paper, and it was not significant for both countries. When the Chinese side opened, after the reforms, Chinese side opened its doors for everybody, but India started in 1991, and after 1991, India also started to cooperate. So since the 1990s, why in 1993 the first agreement on the border was signed is because both sides decided that first let's start our economic relations, and only then decide our political issues. So since then, the trade relations between the countries are increased dynamically. But nowadays there is a huge problem of imbalance from the Indian side. So out of 85 million, 51 is imbalance for the Chinese million. So it's really significant.
Yeah. So why is China not proposing this exchange. Yeah, these days, because they think that they got the upper hand now.
Yes.
They are more in an advantageous situation vis-à-vis India. Or
Because before the last time when Chinese side proposed exchange was during the Deng Xiaoping's time. So Deng Xiaoping was the last, yeah.
long time ago.
Long time ago, yeah. But it's nowadays China also playing some kind of card. Indians are also playing it kind of, because every time before the elections, every time this issue started to be one of the campaigns, etc. So it is politically for both sides nowadays is good to play when it needs. Yeah, just to manipulate, yeah, when it needs. And in terms of border interaction, the border interaction happens only in 3 places, which is Shithila Pass. It is here. Linkages Pass and Natula Pass, only 3 places. It excludes the, here is the military border personnel meetings, and here also a military border personnel meeting. So they are excluding their disputed territories and have trade only in the undisputed territories. But the issue is that all these 3 sectors are having commercial relations which are not which are not even reach $1 million mark. So it's really small amount, and the major trade between India and China happens between Shanghai and Calcutta. So they go through sea. Calcutta is somewhere near here, or somewhere here, and it goes in that direction rather than going directly through Lhasa, because Lhasa is very close to Calcutta. So another issue is this one. So if they needed to have good economic relations, they can just start relations with Lhasa with Calcutta.
It's interesting, yeah, this adjacency and the interconnectedness. So instead of sending the goods through the rail from Shanghai to Tibet, South Tibet, they can do it via India, by sea, and then the rail. Interesting.
So that shows how complicated the issue is. Because traditionally, before this, all the British India came, the trade, the relations between Tibet and the India goes through Lhasa, and this was the main pass where the trade was operating. And Natula, nowadays it operates 80% of the whole border trade between the countries. And but nowadays this territory where Indian side are afraid to develop the trade relations is so this map, I think. So here it's clear. So Natula is somewhere here, and here is the Sikkim state. But the importance of Sikkim state is that this is the Siliguri Corridor, which is also called chicken's neck.
Yeah.
So it is the only 60 kilometers. And
60
60 kilometers. So there is a huge worries from the caution from the Chinese, from the Indian side, that if Chinese will be somewhere here, they could just invade to this part. And if they will get this territory, it will close the other part. Yeah. So it's very sensitive issue for India as well. So that's why they are not developing the trade through this territory. So Lhasa is through here.
So what is the military presence of China in that region, in that border? Is it a big presence?
It's
relatively.
Chinese presence is in Lhasa, it's in Lanzhou, and in Urumqi. It is relatively big comparing to the Indian side. And another issue is the strategic issue, because the military presence from the Lhasa could reach all the major cities in India, including Delhi.
Oh, so they have a geographical advantage.
Yes, much better advantage. Yeah. But from the Indian side, they haven't got the ballistic missiles or something, so they can just defend themselves, but cannot attack Indian side.
Yeah, so and there are not major cities close to Indian border of China.
Of China, yeah. And Lhasa is far from the borders, and also there's a mountain, so they can't reach Lhasa anyway.
Exactly.
This territory is in more than 5,000 meters above the limit. And another problem is that the the air, how to say, all the types of the planes are
climate?
not operate because of the mountains.
Oh.
So most of the military planes could not operate because of the mountains.
Interesting.
So yeah,
So the average altitude is around
5,000
5,000
Yeah.
plus. Wow.
The lowest is the 5,000. So if you go to Lhasa through, so Lhasa is around 4,000.
The city itself.
Above, above. So it is advised to go by only by train, because if you go by plane, you have the sick altitude illness
Yeah.
because of the altitude. And when you go through Qinghai, somewhere here is Qinghai, the altitude sometimes it reaches 6,000 meters above sea level. So after a couple of hours, you will already get used to this altitude.
You need some time to
Yeah.
use it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's very, and basically the Nepal and the Bhutan was also designed by the British officers in the 1990s as a chain of protectorates. So it calls Lord Curzon designed these two countries, and it was designed as a chain of protectorates. So in order to protect India from China. So part of it, Arunachal Pradesh should also be one of the British India. So that was the main thing. So that's the main problems between these two countries. And nowadays they have border relation only here, and also in near Natula Pass in Sikkim there is an Tawang province, where the third important place for the Tibetan Buddhists. There's some monastery. So it is very important. Tawang was also invaded by Chinese during the war, but then returned to them. And in 2017, when the Doklam standoff happened, it was between Bhutan and the Chinese. And the Bhutan, by the way, haven't got any diplomatic relations with China. Bhutan is a satellite of India, and according to the agreement between Bhutan and India is a guarantee of Bhutan's.
Bhutan's territory integrity.
I don't know about Taiwan, but
It recognized Taiwan, but not
Taiwan.
China.
No? I don't know. But yeah, Bhutan hadn't got any relations, and when there was the conflict in Doklam between Bhutan and China, Indian side, based on the agreement from 1998, helped Bhutan to protect their lands. But it emerged as a problem between China and India rather than between China and Bhutan.
What about Nepal?
Nepal is, it used to be one of the also close to India relations, but nowadays it is more, it has a good economic relations with the Chinese.
With China.
So they shifted their priorities towards China. But before they had, until 1990s, it was the pro-Indian.
Why did they change their mind?
Because of the economic aid of the Chinese.
Incentives from China. Because it is interesting.
Yeah.
The geography dictates for Nepal, I think, to get the closest access to the sea through India.
Yes, traditionally Nepal was good relations with India, but they shifted their external foreign policy when China started to provide some investments, etc. And nowadays they are part of the Belt and Road Initiative, so they have been developing all the infrastructure projects in Nepal as well. So they have a huge railway projects in Nepal. They have a huge investments in other parts of plants, factories, etc. in Nepal. So now they are close to China.
Yeah, but still, Nepal recognize India and they have relations with India as well.
Yes, they have relations.
Not like Bhutan.
Yeah,
Okay.
Bhutan has good. But the interesting thing is that Arunachal Pradesh is not allowed to have any relations. Arunachal Pradesh, this part of China is posed from Arunachal Pradesh. But it is not allowed in Arunachal Pradesh to buy products from the Chinese side. But the interesting thing is that the market in Arunachal Pradesh is overloaded with Chinese goods, which came from Myanmar.
From Myanmar.
So same, they have the same products, but which came from Myanmar.
Interesting. So they have a very tiny bit of border with Myanmar, right?
Yes.
Yeah, not very big one.
Yes.
But the scale is huge. It says 1,300 kilometers. It's more than almost Turkey, I think. Yeah. This.
But it's very difficult. Topographical, it's very difficult.
Very difficult.
Yeah, because Himalayas is Jomolungma is somewhere here, so it's
all the Himalayas.
all the Himalayas, all this territory Himalayas. And if you look at the physical map, you can see that glaciers are exactly goes through this direction. So it's, you can it's clear that it is not reachable from the Indian side to the Chinese. The only suitable place is situated here. Through Sikkim, and
So-
all the pilgrims go through this territory, and it's only the easiest way to reach from Tibet from Indian side.
It is a very complicated geography, topography there, resembling to somewhere in Central Asia.
Yeah.
But I will not say. Yeah. Okay.
So this is the main issues between these countries, and in conclusion, I would like to say this is when considering relations between China and India, even if we know the numbers, the very good numbers in terms of their economic development, their political, they have two informal summits recently, and all the multilateral platforms, negotiations, engagement, cooperation, etc. We should always keep in mind that they have huge issues with the border issue. They have an issue of Dalai Lama and Pakistan, of course. But Dalai Lama, another hope in Dalai Lama is that nowadays Chinese are not doing anything with Dalai Lama because of they think that the age of Dalai Lama is already, he's almost 80 years old. It is 80 years old. And there is a hope that next Dalai Lama will change the situation. And another thing is that the people who migrated from India, from China to India in 1959 are still nowadays recognized as refugees in India.
Wow.
So they are still
half a century.
Yeah, they used to be 120,000 people, but nowadays, according to different calculations, they could reach even till 1 million. So 800, 900,000 people are living as refugees in India, which is the third generation of refugees from Tibet who never lived in Tibet, who were born in India and raised in India, but they still recognize it as refugees from Tibet. So that's why it's important.
Thank you.